but grew up in just north of Terre Haute, Indiana, on a large grain farm. My grandparents, and multiple generations of farmers, as well as an Italian grandfather who had a grocery store. 40 years as a registered dietitian, 30 years at Wegmans. I retired managing a group of about 10 registered dietitians who were the translators of the information to consumers. The product labeling group does the plug and chug. They follow the regulations. They understand what products that we have, and we have thousands of products under Wegmans brand. Thousands of products just in the prepared food center, if you've ever been to a Wegmans. Bakery has hundreds of products, a lot of detail on every product. Customers want to know about things like gluten and sodium and the carbohydrates, and there's regulations, including new regulations that you're going to hear about this morning. One of the things that my boss, Mary Ellen Burris, who's the VP of Consumer Services, handled was the Emerging Issues group at Wegmans. And think back a few years ago to something called pink slime. Pink slime blew us away. It was a miserable, sad situation to see a healthy food be denigrated because of a social media buzz. And we did not get out ahead of pink slime. We didn't know what we would say about it, so it hit us hard. And the executives decided, okay, we're going to form an executive team, about 20 people, who would look ahead and say, what are the emerging issues? Well, the top 3 emerging issues 6 years ago when we started the Emerging Issue Group were, number 1, animal welfare, number 2, veterinary drugs, number 3, to animal foods, and number 3 was GMOs. So as we've worked on these issues, I led the hot topics or the emerging issues. I led the discussion on things where there could be seen to be a consumer health issue. So for example, I led our response to GMO. I led our response to processed meats and cancer. I led our response to added sugar. And in doing those, we bring a variety of stakeholders to come to Wegmans and speak to this group of executives. We usually do this over several months, and we get different perspectives. So we had the non-GMO project come. We had, folks from other perspectives come and talk to us about the topic, and then we develop policies and positions. And we might have a communication plan. We might change our label. We might change information in our magazine. We might do something online. In the case of GMO, we did a significant online presence, and the activists kind of hit us hard. But I just found this to be a very interesting place to be, to help translate the science to consumers. And I just think it's important for retailers to step up and do that. And fortunately, I had an ag background, so I could talk a little bit more to farmers and make sure I had the farming position shaped. So Wegmans, when I retired, Wegmans said, Jane, you've got to, number 1, get our position on gene edited completed. You have to get our comments done on the Bioengineered Disclosure Act. And so I did that, but you know what? When I retired, those issues didn't go away for the food industry. And so Wegmans has had me come back and work on some things as a consultant. The Food Marketing Institute has had me come and lead their gene editing response, the kind of, not, I shouldn't say lead their response, but do some work editing their information on gene editing. But in lead to this, I want to tell you a story. Getting my hair cut last week, my hairdresser, Chiwa, said, Jane, I'm not eating the 3 foods that you should never eat. I listened to, I read this doctor, integrated medicine, said there are 3 foods that you should never eat, and so I'm not eating them. Okay, Chiwa, what are the 3 foods that you should never eat? Corn, soy, and any seafood that's farm-raised. And so I'm not trying to be judgmental, but I said, Sheila, how are we supposed to feed people if we don't have corn, soy, and hey, don't you know that the wild-caught seafood, there's not enough of it we have to have these foods. And it just, it's boggling. But my point in sharing that is that there's a lot of information out there. This doctor, I think, is well-intentioned, but maybe not realizing the importance of these foods. And no single food makes or breaks a diet, but at the same time, I think we need to be out there and be part of the dialogue to kind of raise some skepticism sometime at some of these ideas that are out there, blasting foods that I think are perfectly good. So, busy slide to say that agriculture has been modifying genetics since the dawn of ag, right? Selecting for specific traits that produce food that you could reap, harvest that you could reap sustainably. And if you think about it, this gene editing is just a further step, a little bit of an evolution, not a revolution. It's not such a big deal, but it's coming in the same line as gene splicing, that idea that you could take a very diverse segment of genetic code, maybe from something that is totally unrelated, maybe from a bacteria or maybe from another plant or an animal, and splice it in. Sometimes they'll call it transgenic. Sometimes you call it frankenfood, but depending on which side of the spectrum you're on. But that was kind of what happened 25 years ago. Gene splicing, I'll call it, recombinant DNA technology. Lots of different words for it. The newest word for it is bioengineered. That's the word we have to use on packaging now when we've got DNA from another species in a product that you would not expect to find that DNA, and you can actually measure it. And that's called bioengineered. Remember that. It's going to be on packaging. So my point here is that gene editing is a type of genetic engineering, but not the same exactly as the earlier technology that you know as GMO. So, evolution, not revolution. So what is it? It's the newest tool in the toolbox for plant and animal breeders, but this is in a world where consumers don't realize that plants have DNA. Over a third of consumers do not think plants have DNA. So they're saying, don't put DNA in my tomatoes. Your tomatoes already have DNA. But I mean, that's some scientific misinformation. Now, it includes several different techniques. The one that's getting a lot of play is called CRISPR. And I'm not going to go into the science of CRISPR, but just to say that it is building on a natural way that the nature handles mutations, fixes. It's a way of fixing a problem in the cell that now we've been able to mimic. All indications are that there will be a tsunami of products developed. Right now there are thousands of research projects around the nation using CRISPR. Many of them are in healthcare, but many are in plant and animal breeding. And it is very exciting, and the research is going on, and now people are asking, well, how will we talk about it with consumers? It could help farmers solve problems. It could make some foods more nutritious. It could help make them more sustainable. What's not to like? Well, consumers are skeptical. They don't trust big ag, especially not chemical companies, probably for good reason. And we're not sure what they're going to say. So I'm looking at a double whammy because kind of at the same time as gene editing products, and by the way, there's already 2 gene edited products in the market now. Did you know that? Food products. I knew that there were lots in the pipeline, but I found out through, where else, the news media, that there is a canola and there is a soy. The soy is it has a nutritional profile more like olive oil, but there are a couple of products that are in the marketplace now, and you don't know about it. Consumers don't know about it. It doesn't need to be labeled. right? So that is happening, that we'll have these products coming out into the marketplace. At the same time, consumers will see this new label. And the label will say bioengineered food. Or could say, voluntarily, you could say like on corn oil or soybean oil, because there's really no DNA there, but you could say, you could voluntarily, my company could voluntarily say, derived from bioengineering. So we need to have those labels. Retailers like Wegmans with thousands of products need to have those labels ready and out the door in a couple years. So we're working fast and furious. We've got to talk to our suppliers, make sure we understand everything that needs to be labeled. Now here's the interesting thing is that there's a ton of exemptions on this label. So the way that the label, or the labeling law, this is under the Obama administration, it was written and it's defined bioengineered disclosure, and it said bioengineering has DNA that would not, that these products have DNA that would not otherwise be present. In other words, it's kind of going to that old definition of GMO, that's the transgenic, that's the, bringing in DNA from another species. That bioengineering is only required when there is different DNA. Well, gene editing usually is working with the native DNA. I mean, it's possible that you can gene edit with foreign DNA, but everything that's in the pipeline right now is either turning on or off segments of DNA. Kind of like drop and add on the word processor. Our ingredient suppliers are not going to know. There's not a registry. The way I find out is by trying to watch the media, see who's working on this area. How are consumers going to respond to that? So it's very, very important that consumers feel they have choice. If I am working on a 1% margin, I want every single consumer who could possibly shop at my store to choose me. I don't want to send them over to Whole Foods. I don't want to send them to Walmart. I'm going to keep the prices low. I'm going to have the variety because I want all those consumers to come to me. So I'm going to offer a choice if I want to be successful as a retailer. If you want to be successful in your business, you're going to offer the choices that your customers want. And you're not going to argue with them about their right to choose what they want. But if they ask you for your advice or what you think, you should be able to have a discussion with them. And that's what we try to do at Wegmans. When they ask us and they trust us, for the most part, we try to have an intelligent dialogue about why farmers choose these products. So anyway, back over, there is a reality. It's real that the processed food, and I'm going to talk about processed food, packaged food, is flat. Sales have been flat for a few years. And it's a very concerning reality for many of us in the industry. We like to see sales grow, right? Well, there's a couple of exceptions where sales are growing, and that's in certified organic and non-GMO. They're still a small percentage of our total sales, but they're growing. So companies are paying attention to that. At the same time, I want you to know that we had this interesting little reality check when Vermont had GMO labeling. And in other words, it said on the label, there for a little while, it said, until this other labeling law countered it, it said that produced through genetic engineering. And my friends at Campbell's and Kellogg's said, you know what? Our complaints went away in Vermont. People were no longer requesting information on GMO status. And you know what? Our friend Jason Lusk from Purdue said shoppers became less concerned about GMOs as soon as that labeling program came in. So maybe this is a blessing in disguise for you. Maybe the GMO labeling, or the bioengineered labeling, will actually reduce consumer angst because they'll see the familiar foods they've always known with that label and not be so afraid of them. As Leah said yesterday, they think that the odd-looking, ugly fruit or the purple tomato must be a GMO, not realizing the amazing diversity of plants that are in the world today. Anyway, that's just another thing to be watching. My point before, consumers need choice, and it's really your job to bring that safe, affordable food to the market. It's the consumer's job to decide what to buy and put on the table. And we as retailers have to be the agents for consumers. We are a partner with you. We need to understand, you need to help us understand why you're doing the things that you do, and then we need to explain that. But it's the consumer that will choose, and that's the way it should be. I'm open for questions. And
we've got just a couple of minutes here before she has to run.
I have to leave by 8:30.
By 8:30. 7 minutes.
Right.
If there aren't any questions from the group right now, I want to ask her one thing. We got into the whole labeling issue. As we go forward, more and more scientific issues are going to come to the front when it comes to our food. How do we communicate the safety of those issues to the consumer without them getting all excited like they did about, say, pink slime?
Yeah. Well, I think being a trusted supplier is really important, and the best thing that we can do is offer the product and offer an explanation. Wegmans was the first company to come out with our own irradiated beef. We were the first company to come out with a program called Cook to 160, and we had some of our category merchants in the meat department were like, you can't do that. We can't tell people to cook to 160. That'll make them afraid of eating meat. That'll make them think. And Danny Wegman, the chairman of the company, said, cook it to 160 or die. I mean, he was like, how are we going to... Reality is that we had customers getting sick and having major hospitalizations. No, thank God nobody got sick from E. coli. But we had a real effort to help people understand that when it's ground beef and that E. coli it's likely to be spread throughout that patty, you can't judge by color. You have to cook to 160. My point is that we became trusted. And we're still selling irradiated ground beef. It's the only ground beef I buy. It's not a huge seller, but we're the only company, because we talk about it, and we're not afraid of talking about it, and we think it helps with health. We're concerned about health, and that comes through. People can disagree with us, and they can go and buy a different... We have non-irradiated ground beef. But we talk about it, we educate as much as we can, and we really focus on educating our people, because it's our people that are out there talking about these issues. We've got a question over here.
Thank you very much. I am a mom of millennials and girlfriends. One has celiac disease. She blamed Norman Borlaug's work on wheat because she has celiac disease, and she said also that is what causes gluten intolerance. If you could help me, please, with a response.
Go to Wegmans.com and do a search on GMO. We answered that question because I got that question regularly. There's a couple of physicians that one did a book called Grain Brain, and he was very powerful, very influential in the celiac disease arena. But the experts in celiac disease say absolutely not. That it is not. That's a theory that a couple of doctors have, but we've responded to that specifically with quotes from the nation's leading foremost expert in celiac disease. The rates of celiac disease are the same across the world. There's about 1% of the population. If it was because of that kind of issue, we would have seen a difference in different parts. And it's not GMO. In other words, they'll say it's about GMO wheat.
Another question over there.
Yes.
Good morning. My question is, you mentioned earlier that you work hard to get all perspectives on issues that you're looking at. I'm wondering, what are your go-to organizations or groups where you go to get the farmer perspective or agriculture's perspective when you're dealing with some of these topics?
Okay, well, there's me personally, like who do I go to? And then there's who did we bring in, but that's kind of issue dependent. So because I was part owner of family farm, I certainly talked to my cousin. I talked to my friend Don Vilwalk, who's been very active in the organizations. I talked to academics at Cornell that I've worked with over the years that understand this much better than I do. There's an organization called Center for Food Integrity that we depend on quite a bit, and I was involved with their gene editing summit. They have great information on gene editing. So you know, my Rolodex over the years between folks who are communicators with pork or canola or any of these issues, soy, I turn to them, and then sometimes they will find an expert. Dairy, you know, Beth Meyer is here. Dairy is often, you know, when we have a question about dairy, we often get them. As Wegmans dietitians and labelers, we would take tours of farms in our area, suppliers, so that we understood more. But there's never enough. There's always something, just like in your career, there's always something new going on, which is what I love about nutrition. And it's always evolving, but what's more important than food? So at any rate, if it's a controversial issue, for example, the American Cancer Institute, the American Institute of Cancer Research really strongly is advocating against processed meats, we brought their communicator in. We asked National Animal Meat Institute came and brought a speaker as well for our group of 20. We've used the Center for Science and Public Interest. You know, we try to get multiple voices. So sorry, yeah.